Hello, everyone. Good night. For your hope in me and to help me create better stories, tell me in the comments where and when you listen to my stories. And get ready to start the story by liking and subscribing. Chapter 1. The Copper Kettle's Secret. Let yourself settle comfortably now, wherever you are. Feel the weight of your body sinking deeper into the surface beneath you. Take a slow, gentle breath in through your nose and let it out through your mouth with a quiet sigh. Good. We are about to step back through time together, moving slowly and peacefully into the world of Victorian England, where the kitchens gleamed with copper and brass, and where dangers lurked in the most beautiful and innocent of places. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and imagine with me. It is 1857, and the morning light filters softly through tall windows draped with heavy velvet curtains. The air smells of coal smoke and bread baking, of strong tea, and the faint metallic tang of copper pots hanging in neat rows along the kitchen walls. Everything moves at a different pace here, a slower rhythm that matches the gentle rise and fall of your breathing now. In the basement kitchen of a grand townhouse in London's Belgravia district, a young kitchen maid named Eleanor moves through her morning duties with practiced ease. She is 17 years old, with dark hair tucked beneath a white cotton cap and hands already reddened from hours of work in cold water. The kitchen is her domain between the hours of 5 in the morning and 9 at night, and she knows every pot, every pan. Eleanor does not know yet that this kitchen, this place of warmth and industry and the creation of beautiful meals, harbors invisible threats that will shape the course of her life. But we will discover them together, gently and calmly, as we watch her move through this ordinary morning that is anything but ordinary. The first task of every day is to fill the great copper kettle with fresh water from the pump in the scullery. Eleanor moves through the dim corridor, connecting the kitchen to the small room where dishes are washed and vegetables are prepared. Her footsteps make a soft, shuffling sound on the stone floor, a rhythm like waves lapping at a shore, steady and unchanging. The pump handle is cold under her hands, and she works it up and down, until the bucket beneath fills with clear water that catches the lamplight and seems to glow from within. Copper kettles were treasured items in Victorian kitchens. They heated water quickly and evenly, and they were beautiful objects too, glowing warm and golden in the firelight, polished until they shone like small suns. Eleanor's kettle is particularly fine, a wedding gift to the lady of the house some 20 years before, passed down now to everyday use below stairs. Its surface bears the subtle dents and marks of decades of service. A geography of tiny impacts that tell stories Eleanor will never know. She pours the water carefully into the kettle's wide mouth, watching it swirl and settle. The water is cold and clean, pumped up from deep beneath the London streets, filtered through layers of chalk and clay and stone. In this moment, Eleanor believes completely in the safety and purity of this water, just as she believes in the safety of the beautiful copper vessel that will hold it. What Eleanor does not know What none of them know yet in this year of 1857 is that copper, for all its beauty and utility, can be a treacherous thing. When acidic foods or liquids come into contact with copper, especially if the copper is old or improperly maintained, the metal begins to dissolve in tiny quantities into whatever it touches. These copper salts are invisible to the eye, tasteless in small amounts, but slowly, steadily poisonous to the human body. But we will not worry about this now. Instead, we will simply observe, calmly and peacefully, as Eleanor sets the kettle on the great black range, where coals glow red-orange in the darkness of the firebox, radiating a heat that will soon have the kettle singing its morning song. Let your own breathing match the gentle rhythm of Eleanor's movements as she turns to her next task, reaching for the tea caddy on the high shelf. Tea was the lifeblood of Victorian England, drunk by rich and poor alike, though the quality varied greatly. The household where Eleanor works is prosperous, and the tea she measures out is fine China black tea, leaves that traveled across oceans in the hold of clipper ships, through storms and doldrums, to arrive finally in this quiet basement kitchen in the heart of London. Eleanor measures 3 spoonfuls into the china teapot. A vessel less dangerous than the copper kettle, but not without its own stories. The teapot is decorated with a delicate pattern of roses and leaves, painted with colors that include a particularly vibrant green. This green, this specific shade of emerald that the Victorians loved so dearly, is created with a pigment that contains arsenic, though Eleanor does not know this word or understand what it means. The paint is sealed beneath a glaze, which makes it safer than many Victorian products, but tiny particles can still flake away over time, especially if the pot is roughly handled or develops cracks. Arsenic was everywhere in the Victorian world, hidden in plain sight, used to create the most fashionable and desirable colors. The wallpapers that decorated the finest rooms were often colored with arsenic-based greens and blues. Ladies' dresses in shades of emerald and Paris green contained arsenic in their dyes. Even children's toys and artificial flowers glowed with arsenic's peculiar brilliance. It was an age of beautiful poisons, though few understood the connection between their lovely possessions and the mysterious illnesses that plagued so many households. But Eleanor, in her basement kitchen, thinks only of the tea she is preparing. The copper kettle begins to hum now, a low note that gradually rises in pitch. Steam starts to wisp from its spout, curling up into the air like spirits, like dreams, like the thoughts that drift through your mind as you relax deeper and deeper into stillness. Take another slow breath with me now. Feel how your body has grown heavier, how your muscles have softened. The story continues around you like a gentle stream, and you are simply resting beside it, listening, drifting. Eleanor lifts the kettle with a cloth wrapped around its handle to protect her hand from the heat. The copper is almost too hot to hold, even through the fabric, but her movements are practiced and sure. She pours the boiling water over the tea leaves in their pot, and immediately the air fills with the rich, slightly bitter scent of steeping tea. It is a smell that means comfort and routine, that means the day has properly begun. While the tea steeps, Eleanor turns her attention to preparing breakfast for the family upstairs. This morning's menu calls for eggs, bacon, toast with butter and marmalade, and a special treat, preserved plums in a bright red syrup. These plums are the last of a batch put up the previous autumn, and they sit in their glass jar on the pantry shelf, glowing like rubies in the lamplight. The preservation of food was a crucial skill in Victorian times, long before the invention of refrigeration as we know it. Housewives and their servants worked hard during the harvest seasons to put up enough preserved fruits, vegetables, pickles, and jams to last through the winter months. The methods used are often based on centuries-old traditions, passed down from mother to daughter, refined through trial and error. But some Victorian preservation methods, while effective at keeping food from spoiling, introduced their own dangers. Many preserved foods were stored in earthenware crocks, glazed with lead-based glazes. Others were colored with mineral-based dyes to make them more appealing to the eye. The bright red syrup surrounding Eleanor's plums, for instance, owes its vivid color to the addition of cochineal, a natural dye made from crushed insects, which is relatively harmless, but also to a touch of red lead oxide, which is decidedly not. Red lead was used to intensify colors in many Victorian foods. Cheese was colored more vividly orange with it. Candy was made more appealing to children with generous additions of lead-based pigments. Even wine was sometimes fortified with lead to improve its sweetness and shelf life. The Victorians were slowly, unknowingly poisoning themselves in their quest for vivid colors and appealing presentations. Eleanor spoons the plums into a cut glass serving dish, arranging them carefully with their syrup pooled around them like a crimson mirror. She does not feel the slight numbness in her fingertips, the faint metallic taste that sometimes appears at the back of her tongue. These sensations are so mild, so easily attributed to other causes, tiredness, poor sleep, the general hardships of her life, that she dismisses them without thought. Let your own hands relax completely now. Wherever they rest, feel them growing heavier, warmer, as if they are sinking into soft sand or warm water. There is nothing you need to hold on to, nothing you need to grasp. The story flows on without any effort from you. The eggs that Eleanor cracks into a copper bowl are fresh, brought that morning from a farm on the outskirts of the city. The yolks are deep orange gold, rich with the good grass and grain the chickens have eaten. She whisks them with a fork until they are uniformly mixed, then pours them into another copper pan, this one specifically designated for making scrambled eggs. Copper pans were prized for egg cookery because they conducted heat so beautifully and evenly. A skilled cook could achieve perfect results in copper that would be difficult in cast iron or steel. But here again, the danger lurks. As the acidic eggs cook in the copper pan, microscopic amounts of the metal leach into the food. Day after day, meal after meal, these tiny doses accumulate in the bodies of everyone who eats from this kitchen. The symptoms of chronic copper poisoning are subtle at first. Fatigue, digestive troubles, headaches, all things that could be attributed to 100 other causes in the difficult life of a Victorian household. Only when the poisoning becomes severe do more obvious symptoms appear. A greenish tint to the skin, severe stomach cramping, damage to the liver and kidneys. By then, the connection to the beautiful copper cookware is rarely made. Eleanor stirs the eggs gently as they cook, watching them form soft, creamy curds. She has made eggs this way thousands of times in this same pan, and they always turn out perfectly. The copper pan is her ally, her tool, the instrument of her skill. How could such a faithful companion be anything but benign? The bacon sizzles in a cast iron skillet, and this at least is safe. Cast iron has its own considerations. It must be seasoned properly and kept dry to prevent rust, but it does not leach poisons into food the way some other materials do. The smell of cooking bacon fills the kitchen, mixing with the tea and the coal smoke and the general smell of old stone and damp wood that characterizes all basement rooms in this era. Upstairs, the family is beginning to stir. Eleanor can hear the faint sounds of footsteps on floorboards, water being poured into wash basins, the murmur of voices. Soon the butler will come down to collect the breakfast trays, and everything must be ready, arranged beautifully on the serving dishes, hot but not too hot, perfectly presented to please the exacting standards of the lady of the house. Eleanor works steadily, her movements economical and practiced. She toasts bread by holding it on a long fork close to the coals of the range, turning it carefully until both sides are golden brown. The bread is white bread, made from finely milled flour, which is a luxury in this time. Poor people eat brown bread, made from whole grain or even grain mixed with cheaper fillers. The difference in bread is one of the clear markers of social class in Victorian England. But even thank you, making each loaf slightly heavier and thus more profitable for the baker. Alum in small quantities is not immediately toxic, but it interferes with digestion and can contribute to a host of gastric problems that plagued many Victorians. Some bakers went even further, adding chalk or ground bones to their flour to increase its whiteness and bulk. These adulterations were technically illegal, but enforcement was lax, and the temptation to increase profits was strong. It was not until later in the Victorian era that food adulteration became a major public concern, leading eventually to the Pure Food and Drug Acts that would protect consumers in the decades to come. But Eleanor, spreading butter on her perfectly toasted bread, knows nothing of these invisible adulterations. The butter itself is another story. Rich and yellow, it comes from a dairy in the countryside, churned from the cream of grass-fed cows. Victorian butter was often salted heavily to preserve it, and the salt used was not the refined product we know today, but a coarser variety that sometimes contained its own impurities. Some butter sellers, eager to make their product more visually appealing, colored it with dyes to enhance its yellow hue. Carrot juice was a harmless option used by honest merchants, but others used annatto, which was safe, or chrome yellow, which contained lead and chromium and was decidedly not safe. The bright, cheerful color that made butter look rich and appealing could be yet another source of slow poison. Eleanor spreads marmalade on some of the toast, taking it from a jar that sits on the shelf alongside other preserves. The marmalade is homemade, prepared in this very kitchen the previous winter from Seville oranges that arrived in London by ship. The recipe called for oranges, sugar, and water, boiled together until the mixture reached the proper consistency, then ladled into jars and sealed with paper and string. Making marmalade was a skill that required judgment and experience. The mixture had to boil long enough to set properly, but not so long that it became too stiff or took on a burnt flavor. The jars had to be scrupulously clean and completely dry, or mold would grow and ruin the preserve. It was demanding work, but the result, rows of glowing jars filled with sunset-colored jelly studded with strips of candied peel, was one of the triumphs of the Victorian kitchen. This particular batch of marmalade is safe, made with care and without any dangerous additions. But many preserved fruits sold in shops were not so innocent. To keep preserved fruits looking fresh and appealing, some manufacturers added copper sulfate, which maintained bright colors but was toxic. Others used salicylic acid, an early preservative that worked well but could cause stomach problems and other symptoms in those who consumed too much of it. Feel yourself sinking deeper now, your breathing slow and even, your body completely at rest. The gentle rhythm of kitchen work, the soft sounds of a morning long ago. These things surround you like a warm blanket, like soft darkness, like the approach of peaceful sleep. The butler appears in the kitchen doorway, a tall man in black coat and striped trousers, his face composed in an expression of professional dignity. He surveys the trays Eleanor has prepared, checking with his eyes that everything is as it should be. A minute nod indicates his approval, and he lifts the first tray, balancing it with practiced ease as he turns toward the stairs that will take him up to the dining room. Eleanor watches him go, then turns back to her work. There is the servants' breakfast to prepare now, a simpler affair than what the family upstairs will eat, but still requiring care and attention. She cuts bread, not toast, and lays out butter and jam. Porridge, too, made from oats cooked slowly in milk. As she stirs, Eleanor's mind wanders to thoughts of her half-day off, which comes once a week, if she is lucky. She has been saving her small wages, penny by penny, with a dream of someday opening a tea shop of her own, a modest place where working women could stop for a cup of tea and a biscuit, served with respect and kindness. It is a distant dream, perhaps impossible, but it sustains her through the long hours and hard work. She does not know that her dream, if she achieves it, will come with its own perils. The tea she will serve will likely be adulterated with dried leaves from other plants to stretch the expensive tea leaves further. The biscuits will be made with flour that may contain alum or worse. The cups may be decorated with lead-based glazes. The entire commercial food system of Victorian England is riddled with these hidden dangers, and only slowly, through scandal and reform and the work of dedicated chemists and activists, will it begin to change. But that is knowledge from the future, from a perspective Eleanor cannot have. In her present moment, in this basement kitchen in 1857, she simply does her work, efficiently and well, finding satisfaction in tasks completed and meals prepared. The porridge thickens to the proper consistency, and she ladles it into bowls for the household staff. The cook, a formidable woman named Mrs. Blackwood, enters the kitchen now, her face still puffy with sleep despite the early hour. She has been with this household for 20 years, rising from scullery maid to her current position of authority, and she knows every aspect of kitchen work with the deep knowledge that comes from decades of daily practice. "Good morning, Eleanor," she says, her voice rough with sleep and the coal smoke that permeates every basement in London. "The breakfast is ready for them upstairs?" "Yes, Mrs. Blackwood. Mr. Hartley has just taken it up." "Good, good." Mrs. Blackwood pours herself tea from the pot Eleanor has prepared, adding milk and sugar with a liberal hand. She sits heavily on a wooden chair near the range, wrapping her hands around the cup for warmth. "My joints are aching something fierce this morning. There's rain coming, mark my words." Mrs. Blackwood's aching joints are a constant complaint, attributed to age and damp and the general hardships of life. What neither she nor Eleanor recognizes is that some of this pain may come from the very kitchen in which they work. The constant handling of copper pots and lead-glazed ceramics, the consumption of food prepared in these vessels, the decades of low-level exposure to toxic metals, all of this takes a toll on the body that manifests in vague, easily dismissed symptoms. Let your own body soften even more now. Release any small tensions that remain in your shoulders, in your jaw, in your forehead. Let them melt away like morning mist, leaving only peaceful relaxation. The kitchen gradually fills with the other servants as they come down for their breakfast. There is Sarah, the scullery maid, a girl of 14 with chapped hands and a perpetual cold. There is William, the footman, a young man of 20 with an easy smile and an ambition to become a butler himself someday. There is Agnes, the housemaid, who arrived from the countryside just 6 months ago and still finds the noise and smoke of London overwhelming. They gather around the long wooden table in the center of the kitchen, taking their places according to the subtle hierarchies of the servants' hall. Mrs. Blackwood sits at the head, with Eleanor beside her. The others arrange themselves in order of seniority and importance, a reflection in miniature of the class system that structures all of Victorian society. Eleanor ladles porridge into each bowl, and the servants eat with the intense focus of people who have been working for hours and will work for many hours more. The porridge is sweetened with a spoonful of treacle, that thick, dark syrup that was a staple of the Victorian diet, cheaper than sugar and valued for its strong flavor. Treacle itself was generally safe, but like so many Victorian foods, it was sometimes adulterated. Some manufacturers added glucose syrup to stretch it further, or even substances like sulfuric acid to mimic treacle's characteristic color and viscosity. These adulterations were not usually dangerous enough to cause immediate harm, but they contributed to the overall burden of chemicals and impurities that Victorian bodies had to process. The conversation around the breakfast table is quiet and practical. Agnes mentions that the drawing room wallpaper is pewing in one corner and might need repair. William says he heard the master speaking of a dinner party next month, which will mean extra work for everyone. Mrs. Blackwood reminds them all that the chimney sweep is coming tomorrow, and all the fires will need to be out by 6 in the morning. No one mentions feeling ill or tired beyond the ordinary fatigue of their work. No one connects the headaches that sometimes plague them, the digestive troubles that come and go, the general sense of malaise that they have learned to accept as normal, with anything they are eating or drinking or touching in the course of their daily work. These things are simply part of life, no more remarkable than the weather or the phases of the moon. After breakfast, the servants disperse to their various duties. Eleanor and Mrs. Blackwood remain in the kitchen, beginning preparations for the midday meal. Today's menu includes a roasted joint of beef, potatoes, carrots, and a suet pudding for dessert. All of these will require hours of preparation and careful timing to ensure that everything is ready simultaneously. Eleanor begins by preparing the vegetables. The potatoes she peels are good English potatoes. Earthy and dense, grown in soil that may or may not contain elevated levels of lead from decades of London's coal smoke settling on fields and gardens. The carrots are bright orange, their color natural and unenhanced, unlike so many other Victorian foods. But the water in which she washes these vegetables, the water that comes from the pump in the scullery, has passed through lead pipes on its journey from the reservoir to this kitchen. London's water system, so modern and advanced compared to what came before, delivers water that is contaminated with lead from the very infrastructure meant to make it safe and accessible. Lead poisoning was one of the great unrecognized scourges of the Victorian age. It came from water pipes, from paint, from cosmetics, from food containers, from countless sources that seemed innocent or even beneficial. The symptoms, fatigue, pain, cognitive problems, mood disturbances, were so common and so easily attributed to other causes that the true source was rarely identified. The wealthy, ironically, were sometimes more at risk than the poor because they had more lead pipes in their houses, drank from more lead-glazed vessels, used more lead-based cosmetics and medicines. The very markers of prosperity and refinement could be vectors of slow poisoning. Eleanor works steadily, her knife moving rhythmically as she peels and chops. The sound is soothing, repetitive, like waves on a shore, like breathing, like the gentle descent into sleep. Let this rhythm carry you deeper now, further from wakefulness, closer to dreams. Mrs. Blackwood prepares the suet pudding, mixing flour and suet, the hard fat from around beef kidneys, with a touch of sugar and a handful of raisins. The mixture comes together into a firm dough that she wraps in a cloth and ties securely. This bundle will boil in a pot of water for hours, emerging finally as a dense, filling pudding that the family upstairs will eat with treacle or custard. Suet pudding was a mainstay of Victorian cuisine, economical and filling, capable of being stretched to feed many mouths when times were hard. The recipe is ancient, dating back centuries, and it has nourished countless generations of British people. There is something reassuring about this continuity, this connection to the past through food. The cloth in which the pudding is wrapped has been used many times before. It is stained dark from previous puddings. But it is clean, boiled between uses to sanitize it. Cleanliness was a virtue in the Victorian kitchen, though their understanding of what made things clean was different from ours. They could not see bacteria or understand germ theory, which was only beginning to be accepted by the medical establishment in the 1850s. Instead, they relied on visible signs of cleanliness, no visible dirt, no bad smells, and on traditional methods passed down through generations. The joint of beef sits on the marble slab in the larder, waiting to be roasted. It is a fine piece of meat from a good butcher, and it will make a proper meal for the family and ample leftovers for the servants. Mrs. Blackwood rubs it with salt and a little pepper, then places it in a large roasting pan, another piece of copper cookware, beautifully maintained and polished to a rich glow. As the beef roasts, its juices will drip into the copper pan. And some of those juices will be used to make gravy. The acid in the meat juices will interact with the copper, leaching small amounts of the metal that will concentrate in the gravy and be consumed by everyone who eats this meal. It is such a small amount, surely insignificant, surely harmless. And any single exposure probably is harmless. But day after day, meal after meal, year after year, these small amounts accumulate. The morning passes in steady work. Eleanor makes pastry for an evening pie, her hands working the flour and lard together until they form a mixture like coarse crumbs, then adding just enough cold water to bring it together into a smooth dough. Pastry making is a skill that requires a cool hand and a light touch, qualities that Eleanor possesses naturally. The flour she uses is fine and white, purchased from a reputable merchant who supplies the household with all their dry goods. But even this flour, from a good source, may contain traces of the alum that millers use to whiten it, or minute quantities of lime or chalk added to increase weight and bulk. These adulterations are so common that they are almost industry standard, and only a determined investigation with sophisticated chemical analysis could detect them. Around midday, the meal upstairs is served, and shortly afterward, the servants gather again for their own dinner. Today they will have slices of yesterday's beef, cold, with bread, pickles, and cups of strong tea. The pickles are kept in an earthenware crock in the larder, and they have a particularly bright green color that makes them appealing to the eye. This bright green is achieved through a common Victorian method, adding copper filings or copper coins to the pickling liquid. The copper reacts with the vinegar and the natural pigments in the cucumbers to create a brilliant green that looks fresh and appetizing. The fact that this makes the pickles toxic seems not to have been widely understood or acknowledged. Beauty was valued over safety, appearance over health. Eleanor eats her dinner slowly, savoring the brief period of rest. Her feet ache from hours of standing on the stone floor, and her hands are rough and chapped from constant immersion in water. But she is warm and fed, and she has employment in a good household. These things are not to be taken for granted in the precarious economy of Victorian England. After dinner, there is the afternoon's work to be done. Dishes must be washed in the scullery, a task that falls to Sarah. The copper pots must be polished to maintain their beautiful shine, using a paste made from salt and vinegar that removes tarnish and restores the metal's glow. Eleanor does this work, rubbing rhythmically, watching the copper emerge from beneath its layer of oxidation, bright and new-looking again. Each time she polishes, minute quantities of copper dust are released into the air, inhaled into her lungs, absorbed through the skin of her hands. Each exposure is tiny, but they add up, contribution by contribution, to her total burden of toxic metals. The afternoon light shifts and fades. The kitchen, already dim, grows darker, and Eleanor lights the lamps that will provide illumination for the evening's work. These are oil lamps, burning paraffin with a steady yellow flame that adds its own smell to the complex mixture of odors in the kitchen. Paraffin lamps were a great improvement over earlier forms of lighting, candles and rushlights and whale oil lamps, but they were not without their own hazards. The fumes from burning paraffin contain various chemicals that irritate the lungs and eyes, and in poorly ventilated spaces like basement kitchens, these fumes could accumulate to uncomfortable or even harmful levels. But compared to the smoke from coal fires and the general damp and cold, lamp fumes seemed a minor inconvenience, hardly worth noticing. Eleanor begins preparing the evening meal, which will be a lighter affair than the midday dinner. There will be soup made from vegetables and beef stock, bread and butter, and the pie she made earlier, filled with preserved apples sweetened with sugar. The soup pot is copper, naturally, a large vessel that can hold several gallons of liquid. Into it, Eleanor pours her carefully prepared stock, made from beef bones that have simmered for hours, giving up their gelatin and minerals and flavor to create a rich, nourishing base. She adds chopped vegetables, carrots, onions, turnips, celery, and a handful of barley to give the soup body. As the soup simmers, Eleanor can taste it occasionally, adjusting the seasoning with salt. But salt in Victorian England was not the pure white crystals we know today. It was often gray or brownish, containing various mineral impurities from the seawater or rock salt from which it was derived. Some of these impurities were harmless, but others contributed to the overall burden of unwanted substances that Victorian bodies had to process. The pie emerges from the oven, golden and perfect, its crust crisp and flaky, the smell of baked apples and cinnamon filling the kitchen with a scent that is pure comfort. Apple pie was a favorite dessert across all classes in Victorian England. Simple enough to be economical, but delicious enough to seem like a treat. The apples in this pie were preserved last autumn in a syrup of sugar and water, stored in glass jars sealed with wax. Storage then ceramic or metal, as long as it was plain glass without painted decorations. These jars are clear, and the apples inside have kept well through the winter, retaining much of their texture and flavor. As evening deepens into night, the work in the kitchen continues its steady rhythm. Dishes are washed, surfaces are scrubbed, tomorrow's breakfast is partially prepared to save time in the early morning. The coal fire in the range is banked for the night, covered with ashes to keep the coals alive but burning slowly, ready to be revived in the morning. Finally, late in the evening, when the family upstairs has retired to bed and the last of the serving dishes have been washed and put away, Eleanor is free to climb the narrow stairs to the attic room she shares with Agnes. The room is cold and small, with a sloping ceiling and a single narrow window, but it is hers, a private space after the communal bustle of the kitchen. She lights a candle, cheaper than a lamp for short-term use, and prepares for bed. Her nightgown is rough cotton, washed thin from much use, and her bed is narrow with a thin mattress stuffed with straw. But she is tired enough that any bed would feel welcoming, and she slides between the sheets with a sigh of relief. The candle flame flickers in a draft from the window, casting moving shadows on the walls. The walls are papered with a pattern of small flowers, and in the candlelight, the colors seem to glow softly. Eleanor does not know that this wallpaper contains arsenic in its green pigments, that tiny particles of arsenic dust are constantly being released into the air of this small room, especially when the room is damp or when the paper is disturbed. Arsenic-based wallpapers were an epidemic in Victorian England. They were used in homes of every class, from the grandest mansions to the humblest workers' cottages. The connection between arsenical wallpapers and illness was suspected, but not proven to everyone's satisfaction. And the wallpaper manufacturers fought fiercely against any regulation or ban. It took decades and countless cases of illness and death before these dangerous wallpapers were finally removed from the market. But Eleanor, blowing out her candle and settling into sleep, knows none of this. She knows only that she is tired, that tomorrow will bring another day of, and perhaps you too are feeling that pull now, that gentle insistence of sleep. Your body is heavy and relaxed. Your mind is calm. Your breathing is slow and even. The story of Eleanor and her dangerous kitchen continues, but you can release it now. Let it drift away into the darkness, carrying with it any last thoughts or worries that might keep you from rest. Let yourself sink deeper now. Imagine yourself sinking into soft, warm darkness, like sinking into deep water that holds you gently, that welcomes you. The Victorian kitchen fades, the copper pots and lead-glazed dishes, the arsenical wallpaper, all of it recedes into history, into story, into the gentle shadows that precede sleep. Tomorrow, if you wish, we will continue this journey, learning more about the hidden perils that surrounded our Victorian ancestors, understanding how they lived and what they faced. But for now, breathe slowly, release everything, let go. Sleep is here waiting for you, and you can surrender to it completely now, knowing you are safe, comfortable, and cared for. The copper kettle in Eleanor's kitchen holds its secret still, gleaming in the darkness, beautiful and dangerous and innocent of malice. All the objects that filled that Victorian world were simply objects, neither good nor evil, but capable of causing harm through ignorance. Through the gap between what seemed true and what was true, let this thought comfort you. We learn, we change, we improve. What was hidden becomes known. What was dangerous becomes safe. Progress happens slowly, generation by generation, and we are the inheritors of all that difficult learning. Rest now. Sleep now. Let the gentle story of Eleanor and her Victorian kitchen cradle you into dreams.